I remember that spring morning in '69, the air heavy with the scent of lilacs and old pine, when a single melody from my wife's music box stirred a memory I've tried to keep locked away in the back of my mind for 56 years. Back then, I was just winding up the garden gate, hands rough from elbowing soil and moss, when Marion's tinkling tune floated down the hallway and through the open window, as clear as the day she first showed it to me. I pause here, the world seems to hush around me, and I'm back on that creaking porch in our little farmhouse. If you don't mind, why not give these old bones a little thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit subscribe so I can keep sharing these memories with you. That's right about the 20-second mark, and I promise it won't change the story one bit. See, Marion vanished 2 nights after that song played, but nobody ever knew why I couldn't bring myself to chase her down the winding road or even call the sheriff. I kept telling folks she'd run off with an old flame, something tidy to settle whispers in the diner and at church socials. But the truth is still locked in the cellar. I never admitted what I did, how I discovered her there, struggling to catch her breath among the dusty boxes and broken shelves, and how I tried to help her, only to realize that my help meant forever silencing her. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times, each recollection heavier than the one before. I see her eyes, wide with fear and regret, and I feel my own heart pound like a drum in the stillness. I find myself pausing, taking a deep breath, before I whisper how that day changed everything. I remember the way my fingers trembled on the latch, and how I wrestled with duty and love, guilt gnawing at me like a rat in the walls. By the time I stepped back into the sunlight, the world had shifted on its axis, and I was a man whose hands would never feel clean again. Decades passed. I planted a garden every spring, tended to my roses, and sat on that same porch, watching storms roll in and out, pretending the past was just another shadow at dusk. In 1985, when my son asked why his mother never came back, I told him she'd moved to California to start anew. He never questioned a word. Kids believe what their parents say. My grandchildren only know her from the faded photograph on the mantle, her smile gentle and mysterious. Sometimes they ask why she's not here, and I smile back and say, she's off on a long journey. They nod, satisfied, and go chasing chipmunks. But inside these bones, the truth rattles like a loose floorboard, an echo in the dark. Every night, I wake to the creak of old wood and the whisper of that music box. The melody was her voice calling me back, warning me of what I might find if I dared open that cellar door again. I sigh, and the house seems to sigh with me. Even now, I can't decide whether it was love or fear that made me freeze when she reached out for help. So I share this memory today, speaking to you as if you're the only soul left who might understand. I'm an old man with a story that still aches in my chest, and maybe by telling it, I can unburden these shoulders just a little. Here on YouTube, we gather around screens instead of porches, but the need to connect, to confess, to feel understood, that never changes. And now, I'm left wondering, if you stood before that cellar door and knew what I know, would you step inside or walk away, never looking back? Would you lock that secret in the dark, or shine a light so bright that every hidden truth can't help but come crawling out? Let me know in the comments below. I close my eyes and drift back to the summer of 1943, when I was just a lanky 12-year-old with skinned knees and a head full of daydreams about becoming a baseball player. Our little farm sat on the edge of Maplewood County, where the gravel road wound between red barns and fields of golden wheat swaying in the breeze. I can still taste the sweet tang of fresh-turned earth when Pop plowed the north field and hear the clink of Ma's and Emma were mixing bowl as she stirred pancake batter for breakfast. Back then, life moved at the pace of the sun, slow rising, slow resting, and filled with the simple rhythm of chores before dawn and lantern-lit stories before bed. Every Sunday, we'd gather at First Baptist Church, where hymnals smelled of old leather and hope, and Ma would press $1 into my hand to drop in the collection plate, whispering that generosity was the seed of a good heart. I believed her. I was the boy who rode his bicycle down dusty lanes with a hand-me-down glove wrapped around the handlebars, listening for the whisper of summer wine through the pines. I thought kindness was everything, that neighbors always helped each other when hard times came, that promises were as strong as oak beams holding up the barn. My mother often said, "You've got the softest heart in Maplewood, Jimmy," and I carried that with me like a talisman, believing I'd grow up to be a man who never let anyone down. I dreamed of marrying a girl with laughter in her voice and freckles on her nose, of building a home by the river where we'd watch fireflies dance until our breath steamed in the cool autumn nights. School was little more than dusty desks and chalk-dusted hands, but I loved the library, where the librarian, Miss Jenkins, wore her gray hair in a tight bun and smelled faintly of lavender. She let me check out extra books on adventures across oceans and jungles, and I'd pedal home, flipping pages beneath the shade of the old oak tree in our yard. I was shy around girls then, blushing whenever one caught my eye, but I felt the stirrings of something hopeful every time Marian Henderson waved at me after church socials, her skirt twirling like the petals of a daisy in a gentle breeze. To me, she was sunshine and pigtails, and I carried the memory of her smile with me like a secret promise. Our family rituals were carved into every season. In spring, we'd plant rows of beans and peas. In summer, we'd pick blackberries by the creek and spend Sunday afternoons eating sugar-stained hands. In fall, Ma's apple pies filled the house with cinnamon and memories. And in winter, Pa would read from the King James Bible by firelight while snow blanketed the world outside. I believed life was simple and good, that every storm would pass, and that people always returned to the ones they loved. When Pa told me once that war was raging overseas, I couldn't imagine how grown men could carry guns instead of plowshares, and I prayed that every boy in Maplewood would come home safe. By the time I turned 16, I'd traded my baseball glove for mechanics tools, helping Pa fix tractors and dreaming of one day owning my own garage. I thought my future was bright and straightforward. Work hard, marry Marian, raise a family, and watch the sunsets from the porch swing. Little did I know how quickly that certainty would unravel, how the shadows of doubt and fear could creep into a soul bred on faith and trust. But in that moment, as the cicadas sang and the fireflies flickered, I was simply a boy who believed the world was as kind as the heart that made him. And I held on to that belief, even when the days grew darker than I ever imagined they could be. Well now, it was late September of 1949 when the unexpected knock came at the back door, and everything I thought I knew about my life shifted in an instant. I just stepped in from the garage, well-stained hands still warm from tightening the bolts on Pa's old Ford, when Mrs. Caldwell, our next-door neighbor with her prim bun and kindness in her eyes, handed me a small, creased envelope sealed with Marian Henderson's looping handwriting. My ma hovered in the kitchen doorway, flour on her apron, brow furrowed with concern. Pa was off repairing the school bus engine downtown. My younger brother Tommy was holed up in his room tinkering with model airplanes, and even old Mr. Whitaker, the retired schoolteacher who lived across the lane, paused mid-shuffle in his rocking chair to peer curiously through his lace curtains. I tore open the envelope, and the scent of lilacs, Marian's favorite, drifted up, mingling with the faint tang of engine grease on my shirt. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the edges yellowed from time spent tucked into her Bible. Meet me by the willow tree at dusk. I have something to tell you. My heart thundered in my chest so loud I thought Mom might hear it from the kitchen. I couldn't explain why my pulse raced faster than the county fair carousel back home. That old wooden horse never looked so swift. I tucked the note into my jacket pocket, the paper crumpling against my hip like a secret smoldering in my soul. All around me, the familiar sights of Maplewood County felt sharper somehow. The thatched roof of our farmhouse, the line of sugar maples glowing in autumn gold, the distant lowing of cattle settling in for the night. But it was Marian's words, simple and urgent, that set my world aflame. I remember how my ma's gentle voice, always a soothing balm, cut through my whirlwind of thoughts. Jimmy, dinner's nearly ready. Don't graze out in the fields again. But I barely heard her, my mind fixated on the willow by Miller's Creek where we'd carved our initials the summer before. I thought of my pa's steady hands, the way he taught me to drive the old Chevy at 14. I thought of Tommy's goofy grin when I got him his first BB gun. And I thought of old Mr. Whitaker, who once told me that a person's true character shows in moments they least expect. Well, I was about to face mine. That letter sparked a fire I couldn't extinguish. I slipped out from the back porch, careful not to startle Ma, and grabbed my cap. The gravel crunched underfoot as I made my way down the path toward the creek, dusk settling into lavender shadows around me. My mind raced with questions. What had she found? Why the hush-hush tone? And did I dare hope this was more than just a friendly chat? Every step felt like I was walking toward a crossroads I hadn't known existed, the gravity of her invitation pressing on me like the weight of an old oak limb. When I reached the willow, its drooping branches swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel, and there she stood, Marian, with her autumn rust hair catching the last rays of sun, eyes reflecting anticipation and perhaps a tinge of fear. In that instant, I understood why people wrote songs about moments like this, because you never get a second chance to feel your first flutter of something real. The world seemed to hold its breath, and I stood frozen, half smile on my face, wondering what new path her words would carve in my life. And deep down, I knew that whatever happened under that willow tree, I would never again be the same boy who believed kindness alone could guide a man through every storm. It wasn't long after that dusk by the willow when the first cracks began to show in everything I'd believed to be solid and true. Within a week of our secret meeting, gossip had already threaded its way through Maplewood County like wildfire in a dry field. Mrs. Caldwell's kindly smile at church socials turned polite and distant when she caught me glancing her way, and even Pa, who'd always trusted me to make my own way, started asking pointed questions about why I was spending so much time wandering down by the creek. Marian's folks, poor, proud Hendersons, caught wind of our rendezvous, and her father came to my doorstep one evening with his boots planted firm on the porch boards, thunderclouds in his eyes. He told me in no uncertain terms that a Henderson daughter didn't waste her time on daydreaming boys who couldn't promise her a life of comfort. I remember feeling a flash of anger, hot and bright in my chest, wanting to shout that love was comfort enough, but the words caught in my throat. That same week, word reached me that my own Pa's health was failing, pneumonia, they said, from the damp winter we just endured. Suddenly, I was torn between two worlds, one where I raced to Marian under the willow with my heart full of hope, and another where I skidded back home at dawn to keep Pa's bed warm and his coffee strong. I'd stand in the kitchen, spoon trembling in my hand, listening to Ma's quiet sobs as she watched Pa's chest rise and fall too quickly, and I'd whisper prayers I'd never known I could pray. I envied the certainty of those Sunday hymns, but in that liminal space between life and loss, faith felt as fragile as the cracked porcelain cup I held. On top of it all, school started again, and teachers began to notice I was drifting, missed homework, staring out the window when lessons turned to equations and dates. My friends at the feed store laughed and slapped my back, but I saw the questions glint in their eyes, the worry that comes when a boy stops trusting the path he once followed without question. I felt the weight of expectation pressing down on my shoulders, Pa counting on me to learn the farm trade, Marian's family watching, the whole county whispering. Inside, a storm churned, fear of failure, guilt for wanting more than what was laid out for me, shame that I couldn't do right by everyone. Then came the night Marian fell ill. A fever stole across her like a thief in the night, and when I got to her house, her mother stood at the door, eyes red-rimmed, clutching Marian's woolen shawl. "Jimmy," she said, voice brittle as dry leaves, "we've called the doctor, but it's serious." I remember the hollow ache that hit me then, anger at fate for picking on someone so young, fear that I might lose her before I even knew how to hold her close, and a deep, gnawing shame that I hadn't been there sooner to protect her. I offered to take her home to my place, to tend to her in the warmth of our farmhouse, but her father, stern as an iron gate, shook his head. "No," he said, and I felt the finality of that word like a hammer blow. "She belongs here where we can watch her." Watching from the shadows, I saw Marian's once bright eyes flicker with something like betrayal. In that moment, I understood that the world beyond our carefree summer days was harsher and more unyielding. I couldn't shout or plead. My voice felt small, insufficient. All I could do was stand there, heart battered by helplessness, as they carried her inside. The autumn wind rattled the windows like a warning, and I realized that life was not the simple, kind-hearted story I had once believed. It was tangled up in duty and expectation, in sorrow and sacrifice, and sometimes the only choice a man had was to watch the things he loved slip through his fingers. By the time I trudged back to my own front porch, leaves swirling around my boots, I was no longer the boy who believed kindness alone could right every wrong. I was a man learning, painfully, that some battles can't be won simply by wanting them to end. And as the first chill of evening settled in, I pressed my hands into my pockets and whispered to the dark, "I'm sorry, Marion. I don't know how to save you." I remember that morning like it was hammered into my bones. The clock on the mantel stopped ticking the moment I cracked open that cellar door, and for a heartbeat, the world was nothing but dust motes dancing in a slant of dawn light. My hands trembled as I reached for the switch by the drywall, and when the bare bulb flickered to life, I saw her, Marion, curled up on an old quilt, her face pale as winter moonlight and eyes wide with something I couldn't name. Tom froze then, and I swear I heard my own heart snap in two. I should have called her name. I should have rushed to help, but instead I stood stock still, feeling every breath she drew as though it belonged to me. The room smelled of damp earth and decay, of secrets long buried, would rot in the faint tinge of roses, as if all the blossoms we'd once tended in the garden had been dragged down here with her. My feet felt rooted to the floorboards, and for a moment I wondered if I was truly seeing what lay before me or if my mind had twisted memory into a cruel joke. But there she was, the woman I'd promised to protect, the source of every hope I'd ever carried, and now she lay broken in the shadows. I knelt beside her, knee creaking under my weight, and brushed the hair from her forehead. My fingers left a trail in the dust, and I saw tears in her eyes glimmer like dew on morning grass. "Marion," I whispered, voice so low it might have been the wind. She tried to speak, but her lips trembled, and what came out was a rasp. "I'm sorry." That word hit me harder than any blow I've ever known. In that single syllable, I felt the full weight of every secret, every lie I'd told, every moment I'd chosen convenience over courage. She reached for my hand, and I felt the strength drain from my legs as though all the timber in our farmhouse had been sawn away. "You were right," she rasped. "You shouldn't have come." My chest cramped, and I couldn't decide whether to pull her closer or turn away. In her eyes I saw trust and betrayal, love and regret, everything a man could not bear to hold at once. I felt the world tilt, like a barn door torn from its hinges, and I knew that whatever choice I made now would echo through every year left to me. I thought of the life we'd planned, a little white fence, the porch swing where we'd grown old together, grandchildren chasing fireflies. I thought of the nights I'd lain awake, listening for that music box melody, wondering if her silence meant she'd left me or if she'd been trapped by something darker than my cowardice. And then I thought of my son, of how I'd told him she'd gone to California to spare him the truth, and I felt a shame so deep I couldn't draw breath. In that split second, something in me snapped. Was it anger, love, or sheer desperation? I stood, mind racing, and with a single, brutal motion, I wrapped my arms around her trembling form and lifted her as though she were a child. I carried her out of that cellar, up the creaking steps, through the back porch, into the pale light of morning, and laid her on the blanket in the garden where the first lilacs bloomed. The world seemed to exhale then, the bulb in the cellar guttering out, the branches above us sighing in the breeze. I knelt beside her, pressed my forehead to hers, and made the hardest decision a man can make. I would not let her die alone in darkness. I scooped up the quilt and wrapped it around us both, tears slipping down my cheeks like summer rain. I stayed there as the life ebbed from her, my hands holding every heartbeat that slowed to a whisper, until at last the rise and fall of her chest stilled altogether. In that moment, I lost her forever and found myself anew, a man shackled by single, irrevocable choice. I carried her back inside, laid her out on the kitchen table, and wiped the dust from her hands, sobbing silent apologies into the dusk. I realized then that the monster I feared was not her fate, but my own failure to act sooner. That day changed me. A son of kindness was forged into a man forged by guilt, and I've walked every step since under its weight, wondering if love alone was ever enough to save a soul from the darkness within. I carried on in the days that followed as though I were sleepwalking through a life that no longer felt like mine. The farmhouse creaked beneath me, its empty rooms echoing with memories that felt more like accusations than comforts. I spent mornings at the table, staring into a half-finished cup of coffee, the steam long gone cold before I even realized I'd lifted the mock. Lunches passed uneaten, and afternoons were swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of crows in the field. I remember one afternoon, standing by the window as a thunderstorm rolled in, and I thought I could hear Marion's laughter carried on the wind, a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost and taken. Nights were the worst. The moonlight spilling through the curtains looked too bright, too accusing. And each time I closed my eyes, I saw her pale face pinned beneath the bare bulb in that cellar, her final apology echoing in my ears. I started sleeping in the front room, wrapped in the old quilt we'd shared in the garden, but I woke gasping for breath as if the darkness itself were choking me. I'd sit on the edge of the sofa, hat in my hands, wondering how a man who once believed in kindness and simple truths could become a stranger even to himself. The chores that used to give me purpose, tending the garden, fixing the fence, oiling the hinges, became exercises in futility. I'd step outside, breathe the morning air, and feel nothing but emptiness settling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't until I found myself standing ankle-deep in the dewy grass at dawn, heart hammering at the sight of Marion's favorite rose bush, that I realized how hollow I'd become. My faith, once as solid as the church steeple in Maplewood, felt fragile and small. I'd pray each night, begging forgiveness I didn't know I deserved, and each morning I woke to the same silent response. If there was a God, he'd grown distant, leaving me to wander through a world that no longer made sense. Friends and neighbors stopped by less and less. I learned that people are good at looking away when a wound is too deep to touch. Ma would write letters, her pen trembling with worry, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. My son called once, voice tentative, asking about his mother, how she was, when she'd be back. I swallowed hard, my throat closing around the lie I still clung to, and told him she was traveling for work, that she'd return soon. I heard the hope in his voice, and I hated myself for feeding it. In time, the season shifted. The roses I'd planted beside the porch bloomed and withered, and I watched each cycle pass, marking the years by petals and thorns. I went back to the fields in spring, turning soil with hands that trembled, coaxing life from the earth even when I felt dead inside. Some mornings, dew-soaked and exhausted, I'd sit on the porch swing and simply listen to the wind rustling through the maples, to the distant lowing of cattle, to the faint echo of a music box melody that seemed to call me back to a time before guilt became my closest companion. Slowly, I found small moments of grace, a robin building a nest in the apple tree, the laughter of children chasing fireflies at dusk, the first scent of lilacs in spring. Those moments reminded me that life didn't end with loss, even if it felt like it. I learned to speak again, softly, when the silence threatened to swallow me whole. I began to write in a journal, letters to Marion I never sent, confessions scrawled on yellowed paper, prayers pinned in the dim light of early morning. Through the act of writing, I felt a flicker of the man I used to be, a man who believed in redemption, who believed that even after the darkest night, dawn would come. I'm still that old man on the porch, and every so often the weight of that day in the cellar settles on me like a winter's frost. But I've learned that the world can be harsh and beautiful all at once, and that in the spaces between sorrow and silence, there's room for hope to grow. Maybe one day I'll find the courage to open that journal and share the rest of my truth. Until then, I breathe in the morning air, tend my roses, and keep listening for the melody that brought me to my knees and, perhaps, will lead me back to my feet. I'll never forget the morning it happened, sunlight pouring through the kitchen window and catching the steam rising from my cup of coffee like a promise I almost didn't notice. I was staring out at the garden, watching the tulips nod in the gentle breeze, when old Mrs. Henderson from down the road hobbled up the walk, her knitted shawl wrapped tight against the spring chill. She carried a small basket of fresh eggs and greeted me with that gentle smile that used to light up Marion's face. "I thought you might like these," she said, her voice soft as petals. Something in the simplicity of her kindness struck me like a chord from that music box I can still hear in my dreams. I felt an unfamiliar warmth in my chest, an ember of hope I'd nearly forgotten. That day, I decided to start something new. I tucked those eggs into my apron pocket and made my way to the bus stop where I knew Mrs. Caldwell's grandkids waited every morning. They were a noisy pair, sisters named Sarah and June, full of chatter about school projects and the latest gossip from town, but I'd never offered them a ride into school before. When they climbed into my old Chevy, faces bright with surprise, I put the basket on the seat between them and told them to help themselves. Their giggles at the jostling eggs reminded me that small gestures can shift the world more than grand declarations ever could. Over the next few days, I found myself doing things I never thought I'd do again. I tinkered with the Chevy until it purred like a contented cat, swept the porch with a broom I'd almost thrown away, and even took to writing little notes of encouragement. "You're braver than you know. Keep chasing those dreams. Come see me anytime," which I tucked into Mrs. Henderson's mailbox in the church bulletin board. Each time I set pen to paper, I felt a gentle nudge in my soul, as though Marian herself were guiding my hand. One afternoon, I spotted old Mr. Whitaker struggling to haul firewood into his shed. His back was bent, and his breath came in shallow gasps. Without thinking twice, I hoisted the bundle from his wagon and carried it inside for him. He looked up, surprised, and said, "Well, didn't know you had it in you, Jimmy." I shrugged, my arm sore but my heart lighter than it had been in years. That evening, as I sat on the porch swing, I realized that every act of kindness, however small, was stitching me back together. That night, I dreamed of hidden cellars and dusty boxes, but I also dreamed of lilacs blooming and children's laughter echoing in our garden. I woke with my heart pounding, not from guilt or fear, but from something I hadn't felt in decades: purpose. In the weeks that followed, I started volunteering at the community center, teaching a weekly writing group for folks who lived through hard times and needed a place to share their stories. Watching them find their voices reminded me that storytelling can heal wounds deeper than any bandage. I still carry the weight of the past, its shadows linger in every quiet moment, but now, when they press too close, I lean into the light I've discovered in these small, hopeful steps. I tend my roses with renewed care, drive Sarah and June to school with a whistle on my lips, and set aside time each morning to pen a few lines in my journal, letters to Marian I may never send, but that helped me reckon with the man I've become. So here I am, an old man who once believed his story ended in darkness, finding new meaning in each sunrise. I won't pretend the road ahead is easy, but I'll tell you this: when someone reaches out a hand, be it with eggs at the doorstep, wood by the shed, or words in a notebook, it can kindle a spark that lights up even the coldest night. And that spark, my friends, is more than enough to carry a man forward, one careful, hopeful step at a time. I sat on the edge of the old porch swing as the autumn sun dipped low. It's like turning the fields into a sea of gold, and I felt a stillness settle over me that I hadn't known in decades. The wind whispered through the oaks, carrying the faint scent of lilacs I'd transplanted by the kitchen window, and in that quiet moment, I understood what I'd been holding on to all those years, not just the weight of my mistakes, but the fear that letting go would mean admitting I'd lost everything that ever mattered. My hands tightened around the wooden slats, and I looked down at the small, tarnished key I'd kept hidden in my pocket since the day I locked the cellar door behind me. It was time to choose: remain a prisoner of my past, or free myself by finally facing the truth. The air felt cool against my skin, as if the world was waiting for me to decide. I thought of Marian's face, pale in the lamplight of that dusty basement, of the apology she'd whispered, in the finality of her stare. I thought of my son, now a man with children of his own, still believing the lie I'd woven to protect him. I thought of the music box that sat on my dresser, its tiny ballerina poised to dance at the turn of a key, an echo of laughter long silenced. And in that reflection, I felt something shift inside me. I could no longer be a man defined by fear, regret, and the secrets I buried deep. I owed it to Marian, to my family, and most of all to the man I still hoped I could become, to face what I'd hidden away. That night, I made my way to the cellar door, lamp in hand. Every step down the creaking staircase felt like a step back through time, the walls closing in with memories too heavy to bear. But I kept going, driven by a resolve that had grown stronger with each breath. At the bottom, I set the lamp on a crate, its glow illuminating the peeling paint and the faint outline of where Marian had fallen. My fingers hovered over the lock on the wooden box I'd hidden beneath a stack of crates, the lock that held the evidence of my greatest failing. With a deep breath, I eased the lock open, and the box creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside lay the small, broken keepsake she'd left behind, a pressed flower from our wedding bouquet, the tiny silver heart she'd worn on a chain, and the last, crumpled letter I'd never read. "I forgive you," it said in her looping script. I felt tears sting my eyes as I held the letter against my heart. In her forgiveness, I found the courage I'd lacked for so long. I realized that the past, with all its pain, no longer had the power to define me. I closed the box, placed the key on top, and carried everything back upstairs. On the porch, under the pale moonlight, I watched the rose bushes sway and made a promise out loud, first to Marion, then to myself, that I would live differently from this day forward. I would honor her memory not with silence or secrets, but by embracing each morning with gratitude, by sharing my story so that others might learn from my failures, and by nurturing the small acts of kindness that had slowly rekindled hope in my heart. With that, I took the tarnished key in my hand one last time and tossed it into the fire pit, where it fell with a final clang and melted into nothingness. The lock's echo faded into the night, and I felt the lightness in my chest that had been absent for more years than I could count. I understood then that to forgive myself was not to forget the past, but to accept that I could no longer change what happened, and that was exactly the freedom I needed. As the embers glowed around the key's remains, I rose from the porch swing, dusted off my trousers, and stepped into the cool evening air with a clearer mind and a gentler heart. I had chosen to live again, without pretenses, without regret, simply moving forward, one honest day at a time. I've spent more years staring out at these fields than I care to count, watching seasons turn as if life were simply a series of orderly rotations, and I used to believe that if I waited long enough, the earth would set everything right. But what I've come to understand is that time alone doesn't heal the wounds we refuse to acknowledge, it merely deepens the scars we carry. Back when I first shut that cellar door on Marion's final moments, I convinced myself that silence was protection, that burying a painful truth would spare everyone the heartache. Yet the real lesson life taught me is that the truths we hide grow heavier with each passing day, pressing down on our spirits until we can scarcely breathe. Now, after untold lies and decades of carrying guilt like a stone in my pocket, I see that genuine freedom comes not from waiting patiently, but from choosing deliberately to set our burdens down. I learned that love without courage is a flame that flickers and dies, that promises of someday too often become excuses for never acting at all. I believed for so long that people always return to the ones they loved, that kindness alone could navigate a man through every storm. Yet I discovered that storms demand action, sometimes messy, sometimes frightening, and that the most loving choice may be the hardest to make. If there's a truth I'd share with anyone who listens, it's this. Don't let fear of pain keep you from speaking your heart. Don't believe that silence equates to safety, for secrets, once formed, can become prisons of our own making. Whether it's a confession, an apology, a long postponed, "I'm sorry," or an overdue, "I forgive you," those words have the power to unlock doors we thought sealed forever. Even when the consequences feel overwhelming, the act of bringing hidden truths into the open offers a kind of redemption that no amount of solitude can ever provide. I've come to understand that life isn't about erasing the past, but about weaving its threads into the fabric of who we are, honoring our losses by letting them teach us, rather than letting them define us. When we carry our regrets like burdens, we miss the chance to grow stronger, more compassionate, more alive. But when we choose to face those moments head-on, we find that our vulnerabilities can become wellsprings of empathy, that our mistakes can guide others away from the same pitfalls, and that our stories, however dark, can shine a light for souls still wandering in the shadows. Perhaps the greatest wisdom I've gained is that healing is not a destination but a journey of small, daily choices. It's the decision to plant new roses after the frost, to speak kind words to a stranger when we've been hurt, to pick up a pen and write letters we may never send, to offer help when it means stepping beyond our comfort zones. These acts, modest though they seem, awaken hope in a soul grown weary, reminding us that our capacity for goodness endures even after we've tasted regret. So if you find yourself waiting for the right moment, the perfect circumstance, the wound to close on its own, perhaps it's time to stop. Perhaps it's time to take that first trembling step toward truth, to speak the words you've held back, to bring into the light whatever you've confined to darkness. Because I've learned that living with courage, with openness, with compassion for ourselves and others, is the surest way to build a life that honors both our past and the promise of tomorrow. And though the path may not be easy, it is, without doubt, the most worthwhile journey a heart can take. I've walked you through the creaking floors of memory and the silent weight of secrets, but now I want to speak directly to you. as though we're sitting side by side on this old porch swing under the evening sky. I hope you feel the yearnings and the small sparks of hope that have carried me from that cellar's darkness back into the light of daily life, tending roses and sharing simple kindnesses with neighbors. I hope you sense the warmth in my words, the tremble of a heart that has known both regret and redemption, and the quiet satisfaction of choosing each day to move forward with honesty. This story isn't merely a dusty relic of days gone by. It lives in the small moments we experience right now, in the chances we take to speak the truths we've kept locked away, in the hands we reach out to hold, and in the forgiveness we offer, both to ourselves and to others. When I think of Marion's laughter carried on the breeze, I'm reminded that love, real love, leaves gentle echoes long after a person has gone. And yet, I know that love without action can fade like an unplayed tune. So I ask you, how will you honor the stories that shape you? Will you allow fear or pride to keep you silent? Or will you have the courage to open that metaphorical cellar door and let light into your own hidden rooms? I tell this story not to wallow in sorrow, but to remind us all that our pasts may be threads in the tapestry of who we are, but they need not be the edges that unravel us. We can weave forgiveness, hope, and purpose into each new sunrise. I want you to feel the breeze that once rustled Marion's hair, to taste the morning dew on the roses we planted together, and to hear the heartbeat of life calling you to embrace your own truths. Remember that even in your hardest moments, you are not alone. There are others who have carried weighty secrets and still found a way to breathe freely again. Perhaps like me, you'll discover that the most profound acts of courage are not battled on distant fields, but in the quiet chambers of the heart, where a single choice, to speak, to forgive, to hope, can set a lifetime of healing in motion. I leave you with this. Sometimes, when the sun dips low and the world feels hushed, I swear I can still hear the faint tinkle of that music box melody drifting through the air, as if Marion herself is reminding me that love endures beyond barriers of time and silence. And in those moments, I realize that the story we share today is not only about a past wound, but about the promise of every today to begin anew. And what do you think? Should true love ever come back? And sometimes, I feel that she still remembers.